I knew a man who is now all over Shalom, who was very, very smart, incredibly smart, brilliant man. And he was an intellectual. He had 3 or 4 PhDs. He was a brilliant man. And he struggled his whole life with different things. But not only was he frum, he loved frumkeit. He loved frumkeit. He loved even pnimis. He loved mysticism, Kabbalah. It wasn't easy for him. It was not easy for him to sustain. His Yetzer Hara was schlepping him in all kinds of directions. But he wasn't doing Yiddishkeit halfway. He always felt like he wanted to do it more. I don't want to say too many details about him because I don't want you to figure out who I'm talking about, but I've heard from his children things that reflected how he knew that he could have been a bigger chassid. He was like Chassidus Yid and a chassid could have been bigger, you know. And I know him since childhood. I know him for almost 50 years. I know him for more than 50 years. And I was talking to him once. And the context is not important, but he said to me, for me to be makarav a person to Yiddishkeit is easy. I'm very good at makaraving. That's how we phrase it. I'm very good at kiddush. I can be makarav everybody to Yiddishkeit. Why he said it and the context of how he said it is immaterial. But I want you to understand what he meant, the way I understood what he meant, based on my exposure to this man. What he was trying to say is, I am so smart, I can convince anybody of anything. And you know what? He really was that smart. He could convince anybody of anything. And knowing him as long as I knew him, I would make the case that his struggle as a Jew was that he could never get out of his head. Meaning, he became frum as a young man, as a college student. And when he became frum as a young man, there's no doubt that his mind played a critical part in that evolution. In other words, he understood that he needed Yiddishkeit. He understood what Yiddishkeit was providing. And Yiddishkeit resonated with him. It was intellectually sound to him. And he became very frum, and he became a big lam. He learned a lot of Torah. I don't know about Talmud Chacham, but he certainly knew more Torah than most people. And he had a very chush in Pnimis HaTorah, in Kabbalah, and Chassidus, even though he was an academic. But it was never simple for him. You know, he never graduated to Amunah Pshuta. He never made, let's say, maybe this is a simplism and also simplistic and not entirely true, but on some level he couldn't make a deal. He couldn't let go of his brain. Which meant that his whole Yiddishkeit was based on his own, as they say in Yiddish, Iber Zeigung. He was convinced of its credibility, and he can convince you too. But to be a Yid properly, you have to get out of your head. To be a Yid properly, your Yiddishkeit cannot be based on your own understanding. It has to be based on your faith in the credibility of Judaism and your dedication to it, because the Eibishter gave it, like it says in the Pasuk, Nasav and Nishma. You don't need to understand. And as I told you in the last Shir, when I was speaking about the same subject, that the Rambam brings about a Ben Noach, a non-Jew who keeps all Shabbat mitzvahs, including the mitzvah of believing in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and only speaking to him in prayer and not speaking to any other God, v'chuli v'chuli. But if a man or a woman keeps all the Shabbat mitzvahs b'neineach because of hechra seichel, because they make seichel sense to him intellectually, and he doesn't believe that the Eibishter gave them, that divinely inspired. He doesn't believe that it came from Sinai as a different madrega, but he doesn't believe that divinely inspired. So the printed Rambam say, he is neither considered a chassid nor a chacham me'umes ha'elam. He is neither considered a chassid nor a chacham. In the Kisvei Yad Teiman, there's one letter changed. Instead of Villoy, it's Elo. The Aleph instead of the Vav, which of course is a Gevaldik Eremes, as you know, the Sugis, Hu Asanu V'lei Anachnu, and so on. Ashalei Chema, and so on. With the Vav and the Aleph are interchangeable. Which is a Remes. It's not a typo, is a Remes. But it's a Gevaldik Ashkacha Pratis. That if a person is so smart that he is convinced of the truth of Yiddishkeit, and he's convinced enough to practice it, but it's all about his understanding, he hasn't got out of his own head, he's called a chacham and not a chassid. In our Rambam says he's not only not a chassid, he's also not a chacham, and you could explain that as well. But in the Kisvei Yad Teman, the Yemenite manuscripts, which are considered the most reliable, it says you are a Chacham, but you're not a Chassid. Or like the Gemara says in another place, Chachma yesh b'umes tamin. Goyim have Chachma, they don't have Chachma Satera. And the Rebbe once explained in the Fabringen that when you say that Goyim have Chachma, you mean that Goyim have Chachma of the Torah. But they don't have Torah, they don't have the idea, first of all, that it comes from the Eibishter. And second of all, the Torah is Milashon Hira. Every point in Torah is supposed to be a lesson in how we're supposed to live our lives practically. The Goy has the Chochmah only in his brain. It's not connected to higher than the brain. And it doesn't come down to lower than the brain. It's only in the brain. So Chochmah yesh b'umes and Chochmah satera yesh b'umes. But Torah satera, that Torah begins higher than Seichel. And therefore it comes down to lower than Seichel. This they do not have. So two people are very devout. And you could even say they're bottled. They serve God. But one of them reached that space through great intellect. And the other reached that space because they found it in their soul. They found that place in the neshama which has emunah, tahira. And from there they have the strength for the necessary bittul, the yira and the bittul, which is necessary to serve Hashem actionably in Achei Tev and in Sur Meirah and so forth. So how big a difference is there between a person who serves Hashem because his mind came to these conclusions and a person who transcended his mind, even if initially his mind brought him to these conclusions, and he reached a place where he's connecting to the Eibishter because of his sense of Hashem's truth that's not based on proof. If you think about it, the difference between the former and the latter is this business of Re'umah. When a person has submission to Hashem, like it says in the Gersa Kedesh Siman Beis, at the meat of Yankov Avinu, as opposed to Yishmael, there's Kol Shu Yesek Hameu Yesek Love. The closer you get to God, the smaller you become, not the bigger. Because next to Hashem, you don't use your mind, you submit. Such a person's avodas Hashem is real kedusha. They're serving Hashem because of Hashem. They're serving God because of God. God gave them a commandment. They have found God within themselves, and their surrendering to the God within themselves motivates their actionably living as God commands. The other person who comes to the same conclusions and does exactly the same things, but because of his mind is connected to his ego. It's connected to him. So both are bottle. But one is betel mitzad seichel, and one is betel mitzad emes, mitzad etzem. And I guess in another world we'll call it bittel hayesh and bittel b'metzias, but it's really much more than that. It's not bittel hayesh, it's bittel miyesh. My yesh is the source of my bittel. My smarts came to these conclusions. As this young man said to me many years ago, I'm very good at being makar of people. I'm very good at makaraving. And the foundation of that was how smart he is. And how much he's convinced, and in other words, he understands, of course, better than I do, what Yiddishkeit is. And he's able to convince others, but the root of it was self, not the Eibishter. And I think that's a profound way of explaining the dilemma, the confusion of Re'umah. One is bottle, but the bottle is not only that they want you to notice the bittul, what's called in the Maimor Burgish, and Chayis Harai and Tess, and in Hemshech Eter, Tafreshayin, and so forth. But it's where it starts, right? The other Marishan, after the Chet, served Hashem on Eifend of Murgash, as opposed to Bilti Murgash. But other Marishan's Murgash was also Mitzad the Neshama. Here it's not a question of Murgash or Bilti Murgash. Here it's a question of Yeshas and not Yeshas. If a person serves Hashem, and the beginning of that service is his mind, that means his whole avodas Hashem is really serving himself. It's worshiping himself. That's what it really is that. And as a consequence, it has a side of klipa. And perhaps that's the pshat in the maimer. Just like Atzilus can be a mamutza between Elokus and Elamis, even though Atzilus is also Elokus. But because the very fact that this is Elokus which thinks about Elamis and makes an accommodation, is called a ha'ara, to be able to reach Elamis, gives it an Elamis association. So although it by itself is Kedusha, it's truly a mamutza, as the Rebbe is going to explain soon what the mamutza really means. And the same is with Klipas Nega. Klipas Nega is batal to the